as if we know exactly how many men were in line of battle at the time, and a lot of times we don't. And a lot of times, Busey and Martin's figures differ from actual figures given by the men in the units in their account, which I think is interesting to note. We did a whole thing on this when we did a tour of Law's Alabama Brigade in the summer, talking about it. But just using their statistics, I like to use them because then we can give you some idea of their strength and losses. But the division has about 3,000 men at the Battle of Gettysburg, and they lose 1,600 men. And you can see they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 regiments in the division that we're talking about. The Robinson's division had the highest percentage loss of any northern division in the battle. Numerically, they had the 5th highest loss. And of course, some of this has to do because there are only 2 brigades in their division instead of 3 brigades, like many divisions have at Gettysburg. So they have less men and still have an extremely high numerical loss. As a matter of fact, Paul's brigade, Gabriel Paul, had the highest percentage loss of any northern brigade in the battle. And they are the 2nd highest numerical loss of any northern brigade in the battle. So, a couple things about that. What brigade had the highest numerical loss of a northern brigade in the battle?
Iron.
The Iron Brigade. And I think we highlighted that last year when I did the Iron Brigade, if anybody remembers that. And then, secondly, what Confederate unit had the highest numerical loss of a Confederate brigade in the battle? What's that? No. I'm sorry, percentage.
Was it 26 North Carolina?
No, percentage. Brigade. See, they're not remembering my tour last year. Iverson. So you'd think it'd be something like Armistead, right? Highest numerical loss is Pettigrew's brigade. I know it sometimes gets tricky with numerical loss and percentage loss. So Hull and Iverson suffered the 2 highest percentage brigade losses, and guess what? They fought against each other. And guess what also? They were both only involved in 1 day of the battle. So what happened out there was pretty severe. The 16th Maine Infantry, let's see, they're number 3 in the highest percentage loss of a northern regiment in the fighting. And I'll tell you the top 2, because if I do, guess who the top 2 are? Nobody ever gets it. Because everybody wants to say the 1st Minnesota.
25th Ohio.
The 25th Ohio is number 2. Good. That's pretty good. I wouldn't have expected somebody to get that. Good. And then number 1 is 154th New York. They lost like 90% of their men out there at the brickyard.
Wow.
Okay. There are 8 units that had more than 100 men captured at the Battle of Gettysburg for the Northern Army. And 3 of them are from Robinson's division. 4 of them, if you read Busey and Martin's, but they have a transcription error and they give too many losses to the 107. But so a lot of these men become casualties because they are captured. As a matter of fact, how about this statistic? 60% of Paul's division is captured. Or maybe 60% of the casualties, I should look that up.
Yeah.
60% of the casualties are captured. Okay. So the battle that occurs out there is pretty simple to understand in the general sense. The battle started sometime afternoon with the arrival of Confederate General Robert Rhodes' division on the crest of Oak Hill. Carter's battalion of Confederate artillery was wheeled into position and opened fire on the Union line. And although this fire was very effective, and it did have a devastating effect on the Union line all the way down past the seminary, it also warned Abner Doubleday of the threat the Confederate Army presented to the right flank of the 1st Army Corps. Doubleday had previously received reports from Union cavalry positioned north of town that the Southerners were on their way, but up until that time had not taken steps to confront this force. Doubleday was under the impression that Howard was in charge of the field, and that Howard had assured him that Scher's division was coming into the town, and the plan was for Carl Scher's division of the 11th Corps to occupy Oak Hill off to the 1st Army Corps' right flank. Of course, they never got into position because when they arrived there, Rhodes' division already occupied that terrain. You know, standing on Oak Hill near the Peace Light, it often occurs to me that had Rhodes, instead of opening up fire on the Union Army with his artillery, would have simply moved his infantry into position and launched an assault against the Union line without warning, that the first day's battle would be over a lot sooner than it was. By alerting Abner Doubleday to the threat, Doubleday took steps to confront this force. Doubleday began to send units to his right flank. First, it was a couple regiments, and then a brigade, and finally, the whole of John Cleveland Robinson's 2nd Division. When Rhodes' men were finally in position, he launched an assault against the Union line on Oak Ridge that consisted of 2 brigades. General Alfred Iverson's North Carolinians and Colonel Edward Ashby O'Neill's brigade of Alabamians. The early attack failed. Both commanders, unsure of their objectives and unsure of exactly where the Union troops were positioned, met with disaster. O'Neill's brigade suffered heavy casualties, and Iverson was annihilated. After the initial repulse of Rhodes' division, he realigned some of his units. He sent in his reserve, Ramseur's brigade. Ramseur, one of the more competent Confederate generals, split his brigade, attacked the Union salient from 2 sides, and after a stiff resistance, broke through the Union line, driving them back across Seminary Ridge and capturing many prisoners on the way. Basically, that's the battle sort of in a nutshell. 3 Confederate brigades against 2 Union brigades. 3,000 Union soldiers against 3,500 Southern soldiers. Much of the reason for the mass capture of the men in Ramseur's division is that they, on Oak Ridge, were the farthest troops from Cemetery Hill when the Union line crumbled. And also the fact that when the Union line crumbled on July 1st, both ends of the line crumbled first, and they, for a time, were still holding their line as the Confederates were heading towards a town around them. And then, of course, the final thing is when they retreated, instead of retreating across the college campus and straight back into the town, they retreated southward along the ridge, the direction from which they were sent to the spot where they fought in the first place. And all these things caused a severe loss amongst the division. Okay, let's see what we got. Well, got this. Okay. So, I want to talk a little bit about common problems with the interpretation and the understanding and misinformation about the battle that occurred there today. So, I guess it was about 1995 that I was at a lecture at the Gettysburg Hotel. It was one of our, I don't know what to call it, License Guide Association dinners. We often have these where the guides invite a speaker who is a prominent speaker that's not a guide to come talk to us about a Civil War topic. I always feel sorry for the speakers when we have these things, these events. I mean, we always get somebody that doesn't know as much about the battle as we do. But the purpose of it is to listen to someone talk who's not full of himself like we are. That's how I always look at it. And they always have a really interesting take on this battle and what the battle's about. Well, we got Harold Nelson to come speak, General Nelson. And he was part of a team that wrote the United States Army, what do they call it, tour, staff ride, the Carlisle book, tour book of the battlefield. And it was really interesting because he came and talked about what the Army does on the staff rides, which it was great for us to know because we see them out there all the time. And they're hardly ever talking about the battle. They got all kinds of things they're talking about. But one thing he said was interesting. He said that he likes to talk about the Battle of Oak Ridge because it's so easy to understand. Because all the monuments are laid out just as the soldiers were standing, and that what happened there is well known. And I was laughing because if you don't know anything about the battle, you might think the Battle of Oak Ridge is easy to understand, and then you start reading about it. And then you understand that it is not easy to understand, and we know very little about what actually happened. And I always try to explain this to people.